Hey, we are here today at Mastodon State Park. It's a place that Lauren and I and Carson come, and actually we've been finding ourselves here more often in this season. You know, we're standing on a bridge overlooking this beautiful creek, and I couldn't help but think where we were at the beginning of this whole season and in quarantine. You know, we were looking in the book of Ephesians, and the moment that this happened, my mind began to wonder, where should we go? What should we look at for a paradigm on how to move through this season of what I knew or sensed at that time would be impending transition? And I went right back to the book of Joshua. It's actually a book that has been governing and leading me since the beginning of my journey as becoming a pastor. And the beautiful thing about the book of Joshua is it's all about transition. It's about an entire group of people moving into what God has for them, but it wasn't without transition. In the beginning of the book, they are crossing a physical body of water called the Jordan River, and that's where we started in the beginning. We looked at them crossing the river, we looked at them standing in the middle of the river, and the one thing that we didn't look at was what it was like on the other side. And there's a unique moment in chapter 4 of the book of Joshua where God instructs the people to build a memorial. And you know, when I think of memorials, I really think of them like a bridge, like this bridge that I'm standing on, because a bridge is built with intentionality. A bridge is built with a sense of direction and purpose, but it literally just connects one place to the other, and it allows you to cross over something. But a bridge also allows you the opportunity to look where you came from, to see where you are currently, and to see what you're going to move into. It's a connection from the past to the present, affording you the opportunity to look into the future. And you know, really, that's what a memorial is. A memorial, or this monument that they build, it's a bridge as well. It allows you to remember where you came from, to remember what lessons that were learned, and to think about what you're going to pass on into the future. You know, the other day I was listening to this podcast, and there was a neurobiologist on there, and he was talking about how our brains are wired. And interestingly enough, our brains are really wired for a bridge. Think of it like this. We want 3 questions to know. We want duration, path, and outcome. We want to know, how long is this season going to take? How long is this task going to take? Think of anything that you do, your brain's going to ask 3 questions: duration, path, and outcome. How long? What is the direction? What is the method? What is the way that we need to proceed? And what will the end result be? What will the outcome be? We're wired to want to know those things. It's a path that our brain wants to follow. But guess what? We can't answer any of those questions right now. We don't know how long the season's going to be. We don't really know what we're supposed to do or what we're not supposed to do. And we don't know the end result. We don't know the outcome. So a very fundamental biological part of who we are is being violated in this season. So what do? Well, I think we start thinking about, what does the future look like? We start thinking about preparing to build a memorial, to learn what it is that we need to learn, to discern the lessons that God is teaching us and that we're learning and how we're becoming resilient. But we need to pause and to begin to consider what it looks like to prepare to build a memorial to this season. Because here's the problem. There's no bridge. I'm standing on a bridge right now that someone else built. But we are not walking across a bridge that someone else built right now. As a matter of fact, we have to begin to see ourselves as bridge builders. We are going to be building the bridge that our children will walk across, that future generations will walk across. Because isn't it amazing how we often look back on difficult things? Think of 9/11. We look back on it and it was difficult, but we also remember a fondness of it, of how it brought us together, of what it taught us. That's what time does. That's what history does. And I guarantee you we'll look back on this season and we'll remember a lot more positive things than negative things. But I want us to do it with intentionality. I want us to do it with a sense of direction and purpose. And that's what God was doing in the book of Joshua. So right now I want you to begin to think about how and prepare. What kind of memorial are you going to build for yourself, for your family, and for the future generations and people that come behind you? You know, to say that this season is confusing and is chaotic and discombobulating is an understatement, but it's true nonetheless. The word I like to use, instead of using all those kind of negative words, is transition, which you may think is a negative word too, but that's really what we're in. We are changing, we are transitioning. And from the very beginning when this happened, now I'm not a prophet, I don't see the future, but I just kind of sense that, hey, this is something different. This is something unique, and we will be moving forward, and it probably will never return back to whatever normal was. And I've been proceeding with that thought all along. And when you think about transition, it's not a very fun word because the majority of us don't like change. The majority of us just really want things to stay the same. We want them to be predictable, and that's understandable. There are a few people who really enjoy the process of change and discovering the new. Now, I think we all benefit from that, but we don't really enjoy the process of having to do that. And when you think about transition, it's much like this riverbed that I'm standing in. There are three parts of a transition. There are what was, there's what is, and there is what will be. There's this side, there's the middle, and there's that side. You can think of it like this. There's the past, there's the present, and there's the future. I heard one person describe a transition like this. There's an ending of something. Something comes to an end. Then there's a neutral zone. There's a middle. And then there is a new beginning. And really what we're focused on right now, I think, is what's the new beginning? What's the new beginning? What's the other side look like? What's going to be the outcome of all of this? And we're not really realizing that where we are, and I believe we're in the middle. We're in that neutral zone period. And in Joshua chapter 4, an entire nation of people, the Israelites, found themselves in a big season and moment of transition. And not just because they had to cross a physical body of water, but this was a generational shift for them. This was a transition of leadership. Their leader, Moses, had died. An entire generation after they came out of Egypt passed away in the wilderness. And you've got a group of young people ready to move forward into this promised land, not really knowing what that was going to look like. And also partly not fully understanding the challenges that would be presented with on the other side. They're having to transition. And God gives them specific instructions. He says, I want you to cross the Jordan River. And so the priests go in first, and they stand in the middle. And as they do, the water recedes all the way back to a city called Adam, and then the entire nation passes across on dry land, much like they did in Egypt. But God's instructions to them are a bit unique, not something that I would expect, because my expectation would be, all right, now let's go to the promised land, let's knock this out, let's get there. But God says, I want you to pause. I want you to stop, and I want you to consider what it looks like to build a memorial, what it looks like to build a bridge. And he said, I want you to mark this moment. And that's what I want us to begin to think about right now, is how we're going to mark this moment, how we're going to build a bridge, how we're going to build a memorial. He said, I want you to go back into the middle. Go back into the middle and grab a stone. And not just any stone. This is a small stone. The stones he said to grab were stones that they would put on their shoulder and have to carry out, much like this stone right here. A deep and heavy stone that requires work to bring out. He says, bring it from the middle. He didn't say bring it from the past. He said bring it from the middle. He didn't say bring it from the new beginnings. He said from the middle, which is unique. You would think that we want to memorialize the past, but God doesn't want us to memorialize the past. He wants us to remember it. What God wants us to do, though, is to discover what's happening in the middle, in the midst of a process. I don't know if you've ever heard this statement that flowers don't grow on the mountaintops, but they grow in the valleys. The mountaintops are where we all want to be. The mountaintops is what our culture celebrates because of the view that you have. We often forget the work it takes to get up the mountaintop. That the valleys are beautiful, and that's where life happens. That's where things grow. And we could maybe even say this: we're in a valley season of our lives. And the great thing is that it's not just us as individuals. It is us corporately, and we're moving through this together. And I just kind of wanted us to start thinking about what it would look like to go back into the middle. Not really go back, but while we're here, and to think about what we're learning. When me and Lauren bring Carson here, and the creek runs through, and there's shallow parts, and then there's deeper parts. And I noticed that Carson always runs to the deepest part of the water where he can stand, because he wants to try to catch animals, and he's got a net, and he realizes that there's seemingly more life in the deeper part, but the deeper part is also the murkiest part. The deepest part is also where he has to stick his net down and hope that he gets something. He can't see what he's looking for, but he's intuitive enough to know that that's where life is. Kids seem to be more okay with the unknown than we are. They have this natural desire to want to learn, because that's how they're making sense of. Matter of fact, their brains are the most malleable in that season. The neurobiologists tell us the older we get, the more rigid our brains can become. The nice thing is there's a thing called neuroplasticity, where we can actually work to keep our brains flexible. And that is choosing to engage in the unknown and to continue to learn and expose ourselves to things that are difficult. It keeps us fresh. It keeps us focused. And hey, this season's difficult. Yes, people are losing their lives, and yes, people are unemployed and not knowing what they're going to do. And my heart goes out to everyone who's struggling in this season. But I think we also have to recognize that we can't become rigid. We can't just stop learning, that we have to look at the deepest part of it, the murkiest part of it, and realize, hey, there's life there, and though I can't see it, it doesn't mean that I shouldn't go there. And that's what we're doing right now, and that's what God had them do. I want you to go back to the middle and to grab a stone. And he said, 12 of you. Why 12? Because there were 12 tribes of Israel. One stone would represent one group of people, and that memorial would be built. And I think the weight of the stones is significant. And we're going to get there. We're going to look at what is the purpose of the stones? What are the purpose of the middle? But I just want you to start thinking about what stones would you take from the middle? Or have you even looked down? Or have you been so focused on trying to move forward that you haven't even recognized where you're at? Maybe you could just start to think about, where am I? What's around me? What's beneath me? My dad used to always tell me, Josh, when you walk, don't look down at the ground. I've always been a natural looker downer, and I don't know why. I can't see where I'm going all the time, but I've discovered some unique things beneath me as I'm at a store or I'm walking outside. And sometimes it is appropriate to look down. And I think that's what we need to do now, is look down. What are the stones around us? What do they mean? And what stones do we want to take with us as we move forward? So here we are in the middle, the exact middle of this creek. I want you to think about, what are some middles in your life? Maybe the middle of a job transition, the middle of a financial transition, the middle of a relationship transition. Maybe more close to home is the middle of trying to decide whether or not you should send your child back to school. Should they go in person? Should they do a hybrid model? Do you want them to wear a mask? I mean, it's a difficult decision. The fact remains, middles are difficult. I've heard it referred to that a middle is a neutral zone. It's a nowhere between two somewheres. There's what was, and there's what will be. And the problem with the middle is sometimes you can't even see what was, and what will be is not even in the forefront of your mind either. You can't see it at all. And that's where the children of Israel, they find themselves, having to go back into the middle of the river to find these stones. And so I just want to look at, what do middles represent, and what do these stones really represent for us? The middle, as difficult as it is also where the deepest and most profound work happens in our lives. The deepest, most profound changes happen in our lives. For any body of water, it's pretty easy to understand that the middle is probably the deepest part of any body of water. And this is where God has them go. He doesn't say, go to the bank, and it probably wouldn't have been more efficient and effective to just grab a stone from the bank, but he says, go to the middle, not the past, not the future, but the middle. And I believe it's because it's in those moments, in those pivotal moments of our lives, where God does his most profound work. It's almost like he takes us away from everything, and we're kind of hidden, like beneath the surface, and he's developing a root system in us and a foundation for us to be able to go to the next thing. For the children of Israel, before they went and fought the Battle of Jericho, because was their reality. Cross the Jordan River, build the memorial, and then they have to fight to get to the promised land. The challenges that lay in front of them were bigger than the challenges that were behind them. But I was reading, and one commentator said this, that before the nation of Israel would be used to conquer nations, God needed to conquer the nation of Israel spiritually by that moment of them crossing the river and trusting him and seeing how profound he is and how faithful that he is. I've only lived on this earth for 35 years, but I've learned something, and that something is this. God is always present in the middle. In fact, we can often sense his presence more in the middle, or maybe we're just paying more attention. Because when everything is going good, we're often not cognizant or aware of what God is doing. But when we're in the middle and we don't have the ability to orient ourselves, and it's a bit chaotic, we're looking for him, and he's there, and he's doing that work in obscurity. So while the middle is difficult, while we don't really want to be in the middle, we really have to learn how to embrace the middle, embrace the neutral zone, and say, whatever it is that God wants to do in my life, whatever it is that God wants to do with us corporately, it's going to happen in seasons of being in the middle, as we stand in the middle of the river while the water is washing over us like it is my shoes right now, knowing and understanding that God is doing something even if we can't see it. It's like that song we sing, Waymaker. Even though I can't see it, you're working. Even though I can't feel it, you're working. I think that kind of crystallizes what the middle is for us. And secondly, what do these stones represent? Now, beneath me in this creek bed is comprised of stones. It's the foundation. These stones, really, I think what they represent are who God is, what God is doing, how faithful that he is, because he tells the children of Israel, this monument will speak to your children. But also, there are so many stones that we can choose from. We can choose to believe that God is faithful and that he's good and be positive, or we can choose stones of negativity and bitterness and anger and resentment and refuse to grow and become more rigid and locked in our ways of doing something. And the great thing, and maybe disconcerting thing, is that God gives us a choice. We can choose what stones we're going to pick up. Either way, we're going to get out of the middle, and we're going to move towards the new beginning and towards the future, and we will make it to the other side. My question is this: what stones are you going to take with you? What kind of memorial do you want to build? What is it you're going to pass on to your children? What is it you're going to share with the future generations? What lessons are you going to learn, if any? Because the lessons are there to be taught. It's almost like, you have the ability to go download a podcast. You can learn it if you want. It's there, it's available. And that's often how God works. Hey, it's here, it's available. I'm willing, I'm working. Are you willing to participate in what I'm doing? So think about it. Think about it as you're standing in the middle and you're looking at the stones around you. What are you going to pick up? What are you going to pass on? And think about this: the weight of the stone represents the profound nature of the lesson and the work that was done in us. The greater the stone, the greater the work. The more heavy the stone, the more deep the work was done in us. And I think really how deep we go is up to us. And God is willing to take us as deep as we're willing to go. But either way, we're going to make it to the other side. And we're going to build a monument. And we're going to build a monument personally, and we're going to build a monument corporately that won't just be for us, but it'll be for everyone else who comes after us. When I was studying about memorials, I came across a story about Napoleon Bonaparte, the French general. The story goes is that after one prolific battle, in order to memorialize the entire event, what Napoleon did was he got a coin and he wrote the name of the battlefield and he wrote the phrase, "I was there," on it. And he gave it to every single soldier who survived, regardless of rank. Every single person got the same exact coin, and it said, "I was there." As I think about this season and we're talking about memorials, I think about that phrase, "I was there." Sometimes building a memorial isn't just a physical thing, although having a physical memorial is really important. I remember when I was a young kid, my dad took me to the Vietnam Wall, the memorial wall that was traveling, and it was in St. Louis, and my great uncle was killed in Vietnam. And we went to that wall and we actually found his name. And I don't know if you've ever done this, but you can take a piece of paper and you can take a pencil or something and scratch over it, and the name will come out on the paper. I'll never forget that. I was a little kid. My dad took me to this wall. Vietnam, I believe around 58,000 soldiers happened to be killed in that war, and my great uncle was one of those. That memorial provided a way to transport me back into the history of my family. And although it was something physical, not every memorial has to be physical. In this story that we've been talking about in Joshua chapter 4, God's instructions are to the people, through Joshua to the people, to build a physical memorial on the other side of the river, a physical memorial that would be corporate for all of them. And he tells them, he said, the reason I want you to do this is because someday your children will ask you, what does this mean? Like someday you will come back through this piece of land that I'm giving you, and there will be a person in your family, a friend, a child that will not remember what happened because they weren't there, and they'll ask you, what purpose does this serve? Now it will be 12 large stones piled on high, and you will have the opportunity to tell them that I, the God who loves you and is providing for you and has made a way for you, that split the Jordan River just like he did when they cross the Red Sea coming out of Egypt. It'll serve to teach the generations, but also it will serve as a signal to the nations of God's power and his authority. That monument was powerful. The other thing that we read that God didn't command is that Joshua built his own memorial. Now Joshua was the leader of the children of Israel after Moses. And it says that Joshua went back into the middle and he built his own personal memorial, his own stack of rocks in the middle of the river. I find that interesting because nobody would see that. Nobody would be looking for Joshua's memorial. Matter of fact, some historians believe that Joshua would be able to see that memorial when the river was not at flood stage, when it was at below. Because the children of Israel crossed at flood stage. So Joshua built a memorial that most people would never see. And he built it to where he could come back periodically when the river was low, and he could look at that memorial, it being in the middle, and he could remember, be transported back to that moment when God was faithful. Because here's the reality. God does things in our lives, and then we move on, and we often forget. I've heard advice given to me that when God does something in your life or something profound happens, you need to write it down. You need to keep a journal. You need to keep it fresh in your memory, because we think we'll remember, but so many things happen, and there's so many things vying for our attention that we won't remember. And we'll wonder, God, where are you? Because guess what? Another season like this will probably come. Hopefully not a pandemic. But another season in life will come where we'll find ourselves in the middle. And it'll be in those moments that we'll want to remember what God did, what we learned, and what was important. So this idea of us building a memorial, there's not just a corporate memorial that we're building. There's also a personal memorial. And I would just want to encourage you to think about, what memorial are you building that no one would ever see, that only you would know? And maybe the memorial for you is literally just writing it down in a journal, or having a file on your computer where you write the day and the time of what God has done in your life. You know, I followed that advice from someone who was wiser than me, and I started writing things down. And I have a folder and a program that I use called Evernote, where I go into it and I have the date and the year of when it happened, and I refer back to it. And I find myself referring back to those moments when things are difficult, when maybe I don't feel like God is speaking, or when I don't know, or when I'm confused, or when I'm insecure, or when I'm just feeling defeated. I go back and I remind myself. It's like when my father held me up to that wall, the Vietnam Wall, I could see clearly what happened in the past to one of my family members. It's like God gives us that opportunity by building memorials where we can see what he's done. What is it that you need to build? Again, I asked you a few moments ago what these stones may represent and what they mean, and what stones are you picking up? What memorials are you building? You know, my grandfather passed away a number of years ago now, and it was right when I became the pastor of this church. And I didn't realize it then, but I realize it now, the memorials that he was building for us, the bridge that he was building for me and my family. We were sitting at Christmas, and this was the Christmas right before he passed away. And every Christmas, my grandfather would pray over the meal. He was a pastor, he was the patriarch of the family, and he would pray. And he knew that his days were numbered, and when we all bowed our heads to pray, he said, "A.W., would you pray?" That's my father's name, and my dad is the oldest. Everybody in the room immediately started crying because we understood what my grandfather was doing. He was passing the baton of leadership in just a simple way. He was memorializing the moment. And it was all that my father could do to pray. My grandpa built a bridge for us in that moment to be able to see that our lives, what he has passed on, would not die with him, but matter of fact, it would live inside of all of us. And then the night before he did pass away, I always wanted my grandfather to pray for me. You know, it says in Scripture that can be a transfer of anointing. And as a matter of fact, there's one story where Elijah and Elisha, Elijah was the mentor to Elisha, and Elijah asked Elisha, "What do you want?" And Elisha said, "I want a double portion of what God has given you." And so I asked my grandfather before he passed, I said, my grandpa, would you pray for me? And I want you to pray for me, and I want you to pray for Carson. And I would love to have just a degree of what God has done in your life, but symbolically, this memorializing this moment, could you pray for a double portion? And so I knelt down, and my grandfather put his hand on my head, and he prayed for me and prayed that God would do more through me than he did through him. And then Carson, who I think was around 3 or 4 at the time, I said, "Hey, Carson, Grandpa is going to pray for you. Will you go over there? And my son, 3 or 4 at the time, walked over, looked at my grandfather, and just went like this. Put his hands on my grandfather's knee and bowed his head. I didn't tell him to do anything. And my grandfather reached out and he prayed for him. Those moments to me are memorials. It was marking the moment. I knew that my grandfather was going to pass. We were in the dead middle of it. I did not want him to pass away. But it was an opportunity to say, how are we going to remember this moment? And then watching my grandfather pastor us through his own death, building that bridge for us. I look at my life now. I've been a pastor for almost 6 years, and I'm sitting in the same spot with other families as their fathers and mothers and loved ones are passing away, and I refer back. I use that bridge that he built me to know what to do, what to say, how to be in the midst when death is occurring. Those are some of my personal memorials, some of the things that I refer back to, some of the things that have been demonstrated for me. And that's what I want to encourage each and every one of you to do. Right now, just begin to think, what are the memorials in my life? What are the memorials and the bridges that those who have gone before me have built? What have my grandparents or my parents or a school teacher or a mentor or a coach or maybe even someone via a book or a podcast or a sermon has built a bridge or a memorial for you? And I want you to understand as you understand that and that comes into view of your mind, don't forget that that's what we're doing right now. We are building memorials. We are building bridges for the next generation. We are teaching them how to be resilient, how to depend on God. That even though it may seem dark, even though the middle is horrible, there is a new beginning and we have to make our way there, and that God is preparing us for something more. My grandfather gave my dad more than what he had. My dad gave me more than what he had, and I want to give my son more than what I have. And that's the lessons learned. So what monument, what memorials are you going to build personally in the middle where no one sees? And what monuments, what memorials, what bridges are you going to be part of corporately? Because as a church right now, we're building a memorial for the next generation. I believe that I'm pastoring this church simply to hand it off someday. I read a book of a pastor and his son who he was transitioning to, and it was called Passing the Leadership Baton. And I understood in that book a very important principle that we are only leading something to give it away. This church isn't mine. This church isn't yours. Matter of fact, I believe this church has to belong to the next generation so that it continues in perpetuity. And I just am of the belief that what we're doing right now, what we're experiencing right now, is not as much for us as it is for the future, and a demonstration of God's faithfulness, of his power, and of his presence in our lives. And these memorials transport us back to that. What are you going to build? What stones are you going to pick up? What bridges are you going to choose to be a part of that help people cross from where they are to where God wants them to be?